Is this the concierge service?
What's going on in here?
I don't. I have no idea. I'm here. That's what I know.
Got here.
So this is Joe's DR103. It's like a 79 or 80, probably a 79. I haven't looked inside yet.
Mm-hmm.
Joe calls me and he says, "I got a DR103. I don't love it." I said, "Okay, we'll bring out the big guns and we'll find out what you don't love about it, and at some point you'll love it afterwards."
What do you think?
I hope so.
You think it's going to be a successful venture here?
I know it's going to be a success.
And what we're going to do to sort of evaluate how the different amps behave with the different speakers is I brought a power station so that we can lay into the amps a little bit but go easy on the speakers.
Perfect.
So we can get the new Fanes and the old Fanes all kind of at the same power level, so what we're really listening to is not hearing the speakers getting punched, but hearing the speakers just perform, their voice. And then you can listen to that and go, okay, I get it. Now, the reason I brought these three cabs is the Sound City cab is ported like the Hiwatt is. The new Fanes don't need that porting so much to open up. So when you don't really lay into them to get that sort of mid-range quality, the baffle is thinner, but I reinforced it on the back with this V-shaped brace that as it gets closer to the center of the baffle, it gets stiffer, but out in the ends, the baffle can resonate more.
Oh, that's awesome.
So when you set them side by side with the same speakers in them, they have a really similar characteristic, except when you put old Fanes in the new Sound City cab, they sound fine, but when you put new Fanes in the old Sound City cab, they really sound great. So it's funny how they interact. And the Deliverance is the same construction as the Sound City cab, except it doesn't have a port. So you can really lay into it. So we can pound on those a little bit and you can hear how they sound like really kicked.
Okay.
Because the porting of the cab gives the cabinet an extra rumble that the sealed back cab doesn't do. And for some amps it can be overbearing. So it's good to hear the Fanes with the sealed back so that you can hear how nicely controlled they are on the bottom end. Well, you actually have you've recorded with that, but you haven't really heard that one. So you'll get a chance to hear how those are similar and different. And then I brought Dave's PA 100 head that I turned into a mid-70s DR103, so you hear what a real one's supposed to sound like. And I've got a 75 DR504, which is just like one of the best sounding Hiwatts there is. So you can get a sense of, and that's the same basic circuit as that one, except it's 50 watts. So the transformers are different, so it'll behave a little different. But you'll get a sense of what's going on with the overall general voicing. When people say Hiwatts are amazing, that's what they're talking about. And then
Definitely
we'll listen to this
about
one.
This one over here.
Well, but we'll be able to listen to that and we'll be able to verify. Yeah, it's sort of got that brittle thing, and when you try to dime it, it doesn't want to be dimed because it's no good dimed. I think the impulse to not modify it is kind of stupid. I think you can you can tweak it and then you'll be able to use it all the time, as opposed to just wish that it sounded like something.
I use the 30 more than I use this thing. Actually,
Because they go with that cab.
I fill that thing with 75 watt Celestians, and I actually like it like that, but not with a high watt head. But
No.
this high watt head right here blows the ball away.
Right. Yeah.
This is solid state.
Yeah.
I use it with a talk box. It's the greatest.
Oh,
talk
that's
box
the one you were
ever.
talking about. Okay.
So is the overall idea that we're going to have Joe listen to different flavors of the Hiwatt world to determine what you're ultimately going to do with his amplifier?
Yeah.
that the general plan?
Yeah, because first I want to get a sense of what he likes and doesn't. Well, first we'll introduce him to he says, what's a good sounding Hiwatt? We'll introduce him to what is a really good sounding one, traditionally speaking. And then he'll either go, oh, or like, no, I don't love that either. So if that's the case, then we'll probably just go through the speakers because he wants to hear, he's kind of on a Fane jag, so he wants to hear what the new Fanes sound like relative to the historical Fanes, which is that. This is the 22 watts that everybody that's a Hiwatt freak says are the best speakers. We did that show where we went through all that, and they've got their little niche. They've got their cool little thing, but you wouldn't say that they were like the grail as far as the speaker is concerned.
They're the grail as far as doing that one particular
that one thing.
If you want to play the Who, if you want to do live at Leeds,
Yeah.
right there, baby.
But if you're going to do live at Leeds, you need to have 4 of those, and you're going to blow 2 of them in the first 4 songs of the set.
Okay, Steve. So, just for everybody playing along at home, introduce all of these amplifiers and
We have
cabinets.
a current model Sound City Master 100. This is a design that's based on the original Sound City 167, 66, 67 era, the one that the Who used when they were using Sound City gear. That's the amp that helped establish their relationship with David Reeves, and the amp that Pete Townsend introduced Hendrix to, and Hendrix used it in 67 and 68. So
right.
You'll see a lot of live Hendrix footage, early live footage and photographs of him using the 100 on top of Marshall cabs with the JMP head next to it. He used them together. And it had 4 inputs, and each input had its own volume control, and 3 of the 4 were terrible sounding, and there was 1 input that sounded good.
Right, I've heard
And
that.
if you look at old pictures of the Who, you see Entwistle and Townsend both also plugged into the single input that was the good sounding one. A lot of people speculated, maybe because of the CP103, it was custom built for Pete. Why did it have 4 inputs? Probably because so you could have 4 guitars hooked up and just switch. No. It just, that's the way it was. It had 4 different inputs that had 4 different voices, and one of them was pretty good, and the other 3 were awful. None of them worked very good with a Strat.
All right.
But if you turned it all the way up with a Strat, there was this one really compelling sound out of it you could get.
The neck pickup.
That was the neck pickup. You
I know
dime
this well.
the amp. You'd go like this before you hit a power chord, and then you just like take
But
your
it's kind of
punch.
Nirvana
Yeah.
for that.
And after
for
the
nothing
sound
else.
died down and the pain went away, you went, yeah, I want to do that again. So this is an evolution of that, where it actually works better with a Strat. It's got a traditional 4-holer setup, like
And,
a later
and they
Hiwatt.
all sound good. Imagine that.
And they all sound good, and you can blend them and all of that, and the tone controls are a little more manageable.
And there's a master.
Yeah, master volume, and the overall tonality is more manageable and more flexible over a variety of guitars, but it's not a high gain amp.
Right.
In fact, it's a little less gainy than a Plexi, but it's also a lot more immediate sounding like a Hiwatt.
All right, so that's amp number 1.
Amp number 2 is a DR103 in a Hiwatt
clothing.
PA body. Freeman bought this, and somebody had modified into something like a Hiwatt guitar head, but it was an awful modification. So we stripped it all out and configured it. Dave basically said, "What's your favorite Hiwatt?" I told him. He says, "I got an amp. I want you to make it sound like your favorite."
Wasn't there a
Hiwatt."
Canadian mod
There
or
was
something
this
like
thing
that?
called the
What was it?
Canadian mod that I don't have any idea what that really was, except that it was bad.
Yeah, it was bad.
And actually, it's really interesting. It was configured more like what Joe has. So so probably
Back there? Yeah.
when we fire that up, you're probably gonna hear
Canadian
that.
mod.
That she and Erica will too, because she was there when we first fired this up. So I think we're all gonna have this collective. Oh, that's that sound again.
Yeah.
So
What you
anyway,
call it? The diarrhea
so this
sound or something?
this one has been rewired into my favorite era of DR103.
Yeah.
Which is between 73 and 76. But that's what this is.
Okay.
This is a stock 1975 DR504, also with my favorite era of circuit topology in it. So this is the 50-watt version of what this is. And they sound distinctly different because they have really different power and output transformers in them. But they have the same basic circuit.
Okay.
And then the third one, the third Hiwatt that we're going to play with is Joe's. This is a 2-input one. It actually has a little bit more gain than the 4-holer. But you ask any Hiwatt aficionado about this and they'll go, "Oh yeah, that's the one with the blocking distortion." And blocking distortion is the thing that if you push the tubes hard enough, the preamp tubes, you'll drive them into cutoff. And as they're going into cutoff, they make this really awful crackling sound. And that's the thing that anybody trying to get any gain or any push out of this amp.
It's your blocking distortion is blocking good tone.
Right. You'll recoil from that because you'll just like,
I've heard it.
stop doing that.
Yeah,
Right? We
yeah.
just need that to stop doing that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We'll start here. So the tonality is similar. These speakers, even though I beat the crap out of them, they're fresher sounding and a little more sparkly on top. And
Those F70s.
these are the F70s. And the bottom is a little rounder, but the mid-range characteristic is there. The one that sort of defines the faint sound, I think, is there.
So what are you hearing so far?
Well, the Hiwatt cabinet just sounds darker, which is kind of cool. But the sparkle that's coming out of the Sound City cabinet, the definition's incredible and the punch. So, I mean, they're kind of both good. They probably sound insane together.
Agreed.
I sent you a link of the show that we did on that. That probably wasn't a very good representation to watch and get that information. But that's exactly the conclusion that we came up with, was when you're standing right in front of it or playing live or something, there's a big disparity there because of the sensitivity. But when you're recording it, you get to put them where you want them, and then you go, okay, there's this voice there, this distinctive voice that only that speaker does. And I use this because I play some of those early Who dyad kind of things. That's where it really shines. And any other speaker won't get that. A Celestian won't do it. It just won't have that pretty. See, I thought I'd switched over to that. So I'm turning this amp down so it'll play a little cleaner. I think the thing that Townsend really didn't like was this exaggerated mid-range. He liked it really wide, and I heard that he like really beat on David Reeves. Like, no, I don't want any of that distortion. I want like the biggest, loudest, most powerful twin that you can make, kind of a.
I was going to say Fendery.
Yeah.
I mean, looking inside after wiring up a Marshall, I was like, wow, this is like a hi-fi, like a high fidelity amplifier.
And that's how Townsend described it. He says the Hiwatts are just like top end Fenders, but they are different because Fenders had this really dramatically scooped mid-range in the tone stack.
Yeah, that's got a lot mid.
And this doesn't have that scoop.
Punch.
It has the top end and the bottom end that the Fender can do, but it doesn't have the mid-range all taken out, and it's beautiful mid-range. A regular Fender tone control circuit with the mid-range turned up won't do that either. It's just a slightly different tone stack around.
Yeah. So what's going on now?
Okay, now we're comparing these two.
So we're comparing the same 1975 50-watt Hiwatt head, but now we're comparing the
cabinet construction is going to be different.
Yeah, so the Hiwatt cab and the Deliverance cab.
Right. They're both rear-mounted cabs.
What speakers are in the Deliverance cab?
The same F70s that are in that.
Than the Sound City, okay.
So I'm going to start here, and then we're going to listen to that, and then we'll go switch between those two so you can see what the
porting does.
The porting is doing.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, back to here. Got a bark. Yeah.
Nice. Punch. I mean, actually, I kind of prefer it. It's got a punch to it that's just. Especially when you roll the volume back a little bit. It's really nice.
It's more of a familiar guitar cab punch.
Yeah.
It's got a broader mid range, and. Sounds like a beat to shit amp that's been
But
been out on the road a long time, but it's got that great sort of why you like it is because it just sounds like it's going to fall apart any minute, but it hopefully won't. Well, when the top end isn't attacking you, you hear the wood under it a little more. So that.
But this, there's just a lot more to work with the newer speakers and the newer cabinet construction.
That's true.
Like it's more, I don't know if it's translating onto the video here, but in the room, like it's just a lot more full range. Certainly in the top end.
When you're venting a cab, the low end is reflecting off of the back and kind of filling the room. So you're kind of draped in this low mid information that the mid range is there, but it takes your attention away from it. I listen to this stuff with the idea that it's as much as things have a different tone character, it's also your brain is parsing what you're hearing and assigning it a value. So when some of the low end character, like this big rumble, goes away, your brain assigns the mid range more value and a wider value. So you're more cognizant of all the details of the mid range.
Yeah.
Where this one is forcing you to pay attention to the bottom end and by extension on the top end.
And then the SPLs serve as a drug sometimes too.
It does, because if you ran a sweep test on these two cabs, on paper they would look almost identical.
Very
But
interesting.
in the room, they're
No way.
but identical. So in the shop, when we're auditioning speakers and designing cabs and stuff, we go to a room that's open and line up cabs like this with some space between them, and we tape off the floor, set some distances and tape off the floor and mark spots where people can stand in exactly the same spot and go back and audition and then make notes. And that's the only way that you can get an accurate assessment of what you're listening to and whether you like it or not, because otherwise you're just moving around and everything sounds good a different way.
Yeah. All right, so Fane F70Gs in both cabinets, but this is going to be Deliverance cabinet
Right.
versus, we look at it that way, the Sound City cabinet that has a ported back.
Right.
Fire away.
That's where the questions happen. You know, how clear is it between strings? And this cabinet was awesome. It was super round and defined, and that's what I'm hearing here. Even standing back there, I'm hearing the low notes just jump. They're like ropes. You know what I mean? And they're a little closer together over there. So if I was, you know, exactly kind of what you were doing. I mean, it's.
But it's like that's the more articulate cab, but that has this really gluey, beautiful thing happening in there.
This cabinet was designed to be used with this amp, and that's why it's that way. That cabinet is designed to be used with the Deliverance head, which the Deliverance has got more range and it can throw its weight around a little more.
We used it on Slipknot, actually.
Right.
So that's 6V? No.
Man,
so we used that on a couple tracks. And
what cab were you running that through?
I have no idea at this point. It was probably a Mesa cabinet. I have no idea at this point. So long ago. I remember that head though, and just going, because I'm not a 6550 guy whatsoever. I've tried it in a million Marshalls, but then I realized, wait a second, maybe it's a 606. It's a cleaner 606, right? Not a cleaner EL34.
That's correct.
So I've always put it in amps that had EL34s and hated it.
Yeah.
Why did I never
Sure.
put it in the 606 amp? I never even thought of that until
Yeah.
2 weeks ago. A friend of mine said, "Hey, can a 6550 go in a 606 amp?" I'm like, I have no freaking idea.
Yeah. The way this is set up, plugging it into the normal channel jumps it internally to the brilliant channel. So it's basically set up the same way as this one, having a jumper cable on the outside. And then the master is up here. This master is full, and this is the presence, and this presence is there. So I'll turn that down. And
Any new insights?
Man, I mean, you know, honestly, if I was recording, they were all good. So, to me,
It just depends on the unique application.
yeah, I mean, if you were playing, I mean, I think you said more Ron Wood, more Keith. If you were playing a part that's more Ron, I would have probably mic'd up the Fryette cabinet. And if I was playing the Keith, I would mic up the Sound City cabinet.
it's Himalayan salt versus
Pink salt.
versus Indian sea salt.
Morton's.
Morton's.
It's a flash, it's a news
Yeah.
speakers, and then when you are recording, maybe it should be there, but you can control.
Yeah.
But that one has already sound. That's it.
Yeah,
it
it's got
can't.
3 decades of UK mold.
Yeah, and you can't do anything with it anymore. So I understand that, but that one rings really well, and then like zoom, you know, from the like really ringing to me nicely.
I know what you're saying, and that's what we were talking about a little earlier about
Yeah.
once you get past the parts of the sound that annoy you and you focus in on the stuff that you like, you hear all these little complex little things. Yeah. She's really big on this at the factory when we're auditioning stuff. She's not listening like a guitar player. She's listening to this elusive thing that the rest of us are still trying to understand. That when she does this with her hand, she goes, "I'm hearing the swing." And what does that mean? And it really has to do with when you play a chord, it's like a moment of the sound of the chord, like a sample, and how the harmonics attack, peak, and decay over that period of time.
And that's your term for that? Is the
Yeah,
swing?
swing?
What we really learned here is that the power station kicks ass. Because like,
All right.
holy shit! I mean, those amps are coming alive at that kind of level, and the compression, amazing.
Now we've got the DR103 modified PA head, and we've got a DR103 that's late 79 that my understanding from Joe is that it's not cutting it for some reason. I haven't heard it yet. I have an idea about what might happen when we compare these, but I'm not going to say anything about it yet.
All right, Joe. So when was the last time you played through your Hiwatt head?
Well, every time I work on a record and I go for that kind of sound, I plug it in and it sounds like shit. So
Okay, can you describe like what's your sense memory of it
just
sounding like
kinda
shit to you?
thin, ratty. Just doesn't remind me of Pete Townsend doing windmills and power chords. I mean, so
It's reminding you of all the wrong stuff.
yeah. So I had it serviced recently, and I came across this empty Hiwatt cabinet, and I thought, do I service it and play it through Celestians, or do I try to actually have a proper? Maybe the cabinet is what I was missing out of this crappy amp.
Because
maybe
something ain't right.
Something's wrong. So when I texted Steve, he looked at the inside and he said, "Oh, okay." And then we'll figure out if it's the transformers or I don't know. We're gonna figure it out. But this is a great reference for me because the only fans that I have are 20-watt fans in an old Sound City cabinet, and I didn't want to smoke them. Not even thinking that I could probably just attenuate the amp, but my mind's thinking, what did Pete Townsend do? He didn't probably attenuate the amp, right? He just cranked them up and ran through more cabinets. So my first thought is never to attenuate until...
And the more Daltrey bitched about it, the better.
Exactly. Turn it up more.
When you set it up, what was your go-to kind of volume gain formula that you tried?
I tried everything.
Tried everything.
Yeah,
of course.
Usually, I mean, when I don't actually have I don't know, some people just look at knobs and go, okay, right here, right here, right here. I never do that because to me, as a recording, every song changes, every part changes. So for me, I've had like the greatest bass sound in the world, or I thought it was the greatest bass sound in the world. Get the same amp, same setup. Next record is the worst bass sound in the world. So I sat there for a couple hours one day just messing with it, and I plugged the 30-watt in, and I was like, wow, the 30-watt sounds better. EL84s.
So ultimately, we're trying to beat the 30-watt solid state Hiwatt with the 79.
Okay, make it sound like a real Hiwatt. Instead of just a logo.
Just since you brought that up, how do these two Hiwatts stand up to your 30 now?
That's a real Hiwatt, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean those are real Hiwatts.
That's it. So we're not even in.
Yeah, my 30's EL84, so it sounds like a small amp on stun. Okay. It's more of a solo amp. It's an interesting sound.
So what are we doing here? Can you explain this deal? We just plugged in this Y cable.
On the 2-hole amp, you can't jump the channels internally. And whenever I played Strats with it, I had difficulty with getting enough gain. So what I actually did was I made a little jumper like this, and then in between plugging into the jumper with the guitar cable and using the jumper, I put Electro Harmonix LPB1 power booster in there to jack up the gain so that the Strat would really make the amp cook.
Okay.
We're not going to do that this time. We're just jumping the channels together so that we can hear how the bright channel and the normal channel sound. The constant complaint with this amp is if you try to turn the gains up enough to where a guitar comes alive and try to turn the master volume down, that formula, you can sort of get away with it on a 4-holer, but it's really a lot more difficult to get it out of this. So that's why we're using both.
Okay.
But I'll start by auditioning one section of it at a time of that. And we'll start with the normal channel. How are we doing so far, Joe?
It's not as shitty as I remember, but it's just kind of lackluster, in my opinion.
Okay. Now we're going to turn on
Both channels.
and blend them. And one of the things that this amp has that's slightly different from the others, it's got a little bit more robust low end. So I'm turning the bass down a tiny bit. Right.
what did you just hear?
Well, I'm going to say, while I think the Hiwatt, the original modified one, is definitely a truer classic Hiwatt sound, I don't hate my shitty head anymore. But I think the real difference is I was playing my shitty head through Celestion cabinets, and that Sound City cabinet with the Fanes in it brings out the... I mean, I'm a firm believer in someone inventing an amp and tweaking it to the cabinet. But since I didn't have any Fanes, this was my reason to do this, is to give it a fair shot or modify and make it usable. But at this point, I would almost fill my cabinet with Fanes and see if it actually is usable, and then modify the amp if it's not, because that's acceptable to me. It's still got a lot of chime and a lot of punch, but I didn't jack it together like you did either, which is what I would normally do on a Marshall, even if a 4-hole Marshall. And so I never even thought about it, even though I've got a ton of those wide cables. That really made the difference, having both those. Because I literally sat here for hours going, okay, clean channel sucks, brilliant channel sucks, you know, and putting them together, though, it was the full force of that thing. But the Sound City cabinet almost, it turned it into a slightly more robust, round, scooped out Strat. It's all punchy, but still good.
Okay.
So,
All right, now what did you hear?
Well, first of all, I was pretty sure that was going to be his reaction. The only reason he wouldn't react, and I hadn't heard the amp before, the only reason he wouldn't react that way, if there was something distinctly wrong with the amp. But that isn't what I was hearing. What I was hearing was what I remember. I gigged a lot of gigs with this. I gigged a lot of gigs with this. I gigged a lot of gigs with this. So they all have their different little personalities. The thing that was most clear to me, first of all, you absolutely have to jump the channels. Secondly, it sounds cleaner and more hi-fi than
Agreed.
the older ones.
Agreed.
And I know exactly why it's doing that. It was designed to do that. The two gain the bright and normal volume controls on these models, they feed a resistive mixer into a gain stage, and that resistive mixer causes an impedance mismatch that causes a natural roll-off of high frequencies. It also doesn't have as much gain. So when it's not as bright and it's not as gainy, you can get away with turning those gains up a little hotter, and it won't be fizzy and spitty and horrible. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we talked earlier about the blocking distortion, the other thing is that there's a direct connection between on this amp, each input has its own gain stage, and then they sum a different way, and they don't have those summing resistors. Not having those summing resistors actually causes a parasitic oscillation inside the stage following it, and you hear that. And if you try to turn the gain up too much, it aggravates that and makes it worse.
Right.
And that's what the ratty thing Joe was talking about. But we're cranking the master volume all the way up, which with him playing one channel or the other channel and trying to keep the master down, this is what I imagine Joe, and he said, well, I like the faint speakers, it makes it sound better, but I'm going to do what I think Joe was doing initially, just like at the outset, so you can see probably what kind of result he was ending
Well,
up
but let
with.
me ask you before you do this, let me ask you
Okay.
a question. What happens in a very general sense when you play either of these Hiwatt heads through just a standard issue Celestion loaded 412? Bad things?
Different things. Celestians are really forward in the upper mids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's harsh compared to the Celestian. Now the Celestian, compared to the Fane doesn't have that really protruding mid-range in it. It's flatter in the upper mids. It's still got them. If you look at, and charts don't tell you everything, but if you look at the frequency response charts of both the speakers, it looks like the peaks and the dips in the upper mid-range are about at the same amplitude.
Interesting.
But that's not the whole story, because when we got to start talking about the impedance curve, the impedance curve is what determines how the speaker is going to behave with the amp that you have it plugged into. So you have a completely different phase inverter stage, an output transformer configuration that is, it has its own inductances, it interacts with the speaker differently, in a bad way in Celestians, in a good way in Fanes. Same way when you plug a Marshall into a cabinet like this, you'll fucking hate it. Because it's not that the speakers sound bad, it's not that the amp sounds bad, it's the way they interact.
Yeah, they don't play nicely.
The Marshall amp is forcing the cone behavior in the speakers to react in a way that's not pleasant to listen to. And to Joe's point about, I believe that amps are designed to complement the speakers. Well, if any of the stories about David Reeves are to be believed, he would have gone with Fanes and stayed away from Celestians just because that's what people wanted him to do. Use Celestians, they sound great. No, they don't sound great in this. That's not what I'm trying to do.
A little bit of malcontenty behavior.
A lot. I mean, that's where I got it. So I'm going to turn the master volume down and do the classic mistake that people who are used to playing Marshalls are going to do. I'm going to try to drive the front end a little harder, use the master volume to get some distortion, and I'm only going to use, I'm not using the jumper yet, so I'm only using whatever channel is.
And we're all going to be unhappy.
Well, I guess we're going to find out soon enough. That's it. Did you hear anything familiar?
Yeah, the wet towel effect. There's like a wet towel coming to my forehead. It just stopped right here. That's what I.
Which is what this was doing before we modified it.
Yeah,
right? That was the one that made you scream and howl.
The sound doesn't go through your ears or face, or it doesn't.
It's like getting slapped in the face
It
with a wet
just
towel.
slapped. The wet towel just hit my forehead and just
Right.
stopped. It's just really uncomfortable.
Okay, so now I'm going to demonstrate blocking distortion. We don't really know. I know that the output and power transformers on this model have different model numbers than the ones on this one. So I don't know how different they are. It's easy enough to take them back to the shop, and we'll do that. Go back and check them out and see how they react to the square wave and stuff. And I'll bet you will find a little bit of stuff. But I think what we're going to find is it was intentionally designed to be bigger and cleaner and more open. Maybe more Fender-ish, and maybe that was the progression of the amp at the time.
Yeah.
It just didn't go well for a lot of people. All right, now I'm going to switch to the normal channel and do the same thing with the input stage. And now Eric was going, oh yeah, that's that horrible
Diarrhea sound.
Diarrhea is like to me it's like that one was a diarrhea sound. It was like a really bad sounding coming out of the ass, you know, like a, but that one is like a constipation. Yeah, it doesn't come out. Nice sound doesn't come out.
So, where do we go from here?
All right, well, we opened it up, and it's got Siemens tubes in it. Probably 20, 30-year-old Siemens that are in really good shape. So, our little experiment has caused Joe to sort of like rethink the whole thing now. He's discovered, okay, now I've been shown the trick, right?
So maybe it's cabinetry and speaker
It
tray.
could be. We'll take it over to the shop and we'll open it up and give it a little once over, give it a clean bill of health, and get him set up with some speakers in his cab that doesn't have speakers in it, because these speakers sound great in an old Hiwatt cab. We'll do that, and then you can experiment with it.
I'm definitely gonna jump it.
Definitely gonna
Tell you
jump
that,
it.
and then maybe I'm just gonna hire you to play it.
I'll do that too. And then you might say, okay, I know that you've got a little sauce that you can do to that puts it more in that territory, and then you can decide whether you want to do that or whether this has got a flavor that you're going to like now, and if you want that flavor, you go find one.
So really, this amplifier's existence in your arsenal sort of hangs in the balance, depending on what happens in the next episode here.
I mean, I never get rid of anything. I'm a hoarder, as you can see.
Really?
But it'll never get used ever.
Yeah, right.
Unless,
Unless you wanted to record the broken amp sound.
Right.
just at this point, it's just...
Yeah, but maybe it gets a new lease on life now.
I definitely think it does, and even a minor little modification will put it in a whole new territory. Even if it doesn't go in that, even if it isn't that, it'll go enough in that direction that you'll change your tune about it.
All right, you guys, signing off.
Yep.
Yeah, man, thank you guys. It was...
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Enlightening.